Now is the time for Congress to act. Epstein was not alone. Several prominent male executives resigned from their powerful positions after this matter became widely politicized. Of course, this doesn't amount to guilt, but we still must work openly and transparently to uncover the truth. I call on Congress to provide the women who have been victimized by Epstein with a public hearing specifically centered around the survivors. Give these victims their opportunity to testify under oath in front of Congress with the power of sworn testimony. Each and every woman should have her day to tell her story in public if she wishes, and then her testimony should be permanently entered into the congressional record. Then, and only then, we will have the truth. Thank you.
Commanding the Narrative podcast, which I believe is the #1 podcast in the entire universe.
If you could go through life in the Liberal Party without being expelled, you should be ashamed of yourself.
We will decide who comes to this country and the circumstances in which they come.
Socialists don't like ordinary people choosing, or they might not choose socialism.
120 years ago, our country had the world's highest per capita income. What the hell happened?
The answer is mate, because I want to do you slowly. I want to do you slowly.
Ah! We're coming for you, globalist! Ah, coming for you!
G'day everyone, welcome back to another episode of Commanding the Narrative. My name is Stephen Tripp. Thank you to everyone who is watching this. Sorry about the late start. I thought I was working with a professional, but if you could see how what goes behind the scenes in getting Dr. Reynolds up and running, it'd be a podcast in itself. But we got him on tonight, one of the most requested guests on Commanding the Narrative, Dr. Christopher Reynolds. We're going to be talking about Australian history and history of the Constitution and some of the new research that he's uncovered, which is very, very exciting. But before we get there, I want to let you know that if you are watching this live on Rumble, Facebook, or YouTube, we definitely want to hear from you. Get in the chat and ask a question or make a statement. I'm sure that Dr. Reynolds would be happy to answer all your questions. And if you would really like to speak to the man one-on-one and speak to me, you can hit that link to StreamYard and you can call in. We call it Talkback Streaming, just like Talkback Radio. So don't be shy. Don't be afraid. Call in and we'd love to hear from you. But we'd also love you to head to commandingthenarrative.com. And by heading to commandingthenarrative.com, you can keep up to date with all our previous podcasts and any podcasts that are coming up this week. We've had some really great conversations lately about the rise of One Nation and then the implosion of the Liberal Party and things like that. So check out all those former podcasts that we've done in the last few weeks. You also get some articles and updates there on the website, some surveys. And if you want to know who's coming up on the podcast this week, you'll find it at commandingthenarrative.com. If you hit the sign up button in the top right-hand corner, you'll get the updates from me to your email box so you never miss a podcast. So check it out. Everything's there at commandingthenarrative.com. Now, if you'd like to throw us a few dollars to show your support and appreciation, and most importantly, give me a warm and fuzzy feeling inside, you can head to Buy Me a Coffee, and it helps to pay for the streaming services that we use. It helps to pay for the website. So please head to Buy Me a Coffee, and you can throw us a few dollars there. If you're listening on Rumble, you can also use the Rumble tip jar. If you want to donate cryptocurrency, don't ask me what I do with it if I got it, but I'm sure I'd use it effectively. So everything that is donated to Commanding the Narrative is put back into the podcast and some of the production stuff that we do, and also the equipment we buy. And hopefully I've got some really exciting news for you in the next couple months about where we take this podcast to the next level, but keep up to date with all of that. Now, one of the big reasons why I've got Dr. Reynolds on tonight, apart from him being very well respected but also requested, is we've got a couple of events coming up. Now, It's going to be a back-to-back weekend. If you head to australiansforbetter.com, it relates to Australians for Better Government. So you just head to the website, and the first event is on Saturday, the 2nd of May on the Central Coast. You can head to the website and get your tickets. Dr. Reynolds is coming all the way down from Queensland to that event. He's one of the most impactful speakers that you'll find in this country. He's a well-researched historian and also political philosopher, and the only man who have ever worked in the US Congress from Australia. And he might talk about that a little bit tonight. But if you're in the Central Coast or surrounding areas, please come along. We've also got Katie McCallum coming down from Kilkeevan in Queensland. She's making the trek. And also Martin Stevenson, who's a local candidate in the area and also a community organizer. He's going to have some insights about the local area in the Central Coast. So please come along. Our events are always very well received. It's going to be an opportunity for you, the audience, to have discussions about our system of government and empowering a new age of government. And the very next day, on the Sunday, 3rd of May, we're going to be in Cessnock. So it's going to be a double header. Dr. Reynolds is going to be joining us for that one as well. Also, Katie McCallum. The only difference with the Cessnock event is that we're going to have Stuart Bonds, who is very prominent in the One Nation Party, very prominent in the area, and he's going to be very interesting to hear from as well. So please come along if you're in the Central Coast or Cessnock. I would love to see you there. And as I said, our ABG events are always very well received because people like that interaction that goes on. We like hearing from you, the audience, and we want to have discussions about how we can improve this country, improve our system of government, and move this country into a better direction. But let's talk about all that tonight. He's returning again, Dr. Reynolds. Welcome back to Commanding the Narrative.
Good evening, Stephen.
We got there in the end, mate.
What's that?
I said we got there in the end. You're
technology. Anyway, I won't move. I'll not touch anything, right?
Yes, that's right. Now, mate, we've got these big events coming up on the Central Coast and Cessnock. I'm expecting two very different speeches from you as well. I don't want you to just go back to back with the same speech at these events. I know you won't, because you always read off guff. You never have notes or anything like that. Everything comes out of that brain of yours. But are you excited about coming down to New South Wales?
Yeah, last year I did 80 talks in 50 weeks. Think about that. I mean, some weeks I was out 3 times, and my wife says, "Oh, where are you going tomorrow?" I said, "I'll look it up at 8 o'clock in the morning, get in the car and go," And it was just like that. And what am I saying? That people want to hear somebody correct the nonsense that we've heard about Australian history. Now, at the end of the month, and this, if anybody's listening, I'm coming down to Melbourne finally, and it's Wednesday, I think the 28th, if someone wants to look that up. So I'm in Melbourne. Hopefully I'm doing the Melbourne University, and then I'm doing a thing with the Christian Dawson. It's a Catholic organisation. So if you look up Dr. Christopher Dawson, they've got an event in the evening. So it's been really hard to get these guys to organise this, and then I want to do the university. And then I fly down to Hobart, and Erica Betts, the former Deputy Prime Minister, is very happy for me to finally be getting to Tasmania. I'm sort of thinking about the weather and what I need to take with me. But I'm hoping to get into, and we'll talk about this, the Tasmanian University, which becomes this amazing story of how it all got going. Then I come up to Sydney, and then I do another 2 events. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 events in 5 days. So that's really on the road, isn't it?
I feel like you're a rock star, mate. I'm gonna have to get your autograph.
I am, but I'm a rock star with the people. I'm not up there on the stage getting paid lots of money, as I should be. Talking for big groups with people saying $1,000 to hear me. But as you said, I ought to really be talking at CPAC. I mean, I've been along for the last couple of years, and so you put together 1, 2, 3, 6 days of speakers. And you say, well, what am I hearing? What am I hearing? I mean, are people sort of complaining about things? Yes. Are they, saying conservative things? Yes. What about the future, I say? Well, where are you taking me? Where is the leadership? Where is the infrastructure? What are you doing to sort of close down this nonsense of this debt? Where are we creating wealth? And I don't hear it. Now, by accident last year when I was at CPAC, I'd had enough, as you can imagine. I would have, and it was time for lunch, and a beer, So I walk up to the pub, says me to myself, and I'm in a nice suit, and I walk up, I get to the set of lights, and when I cross over, I got to cross again, and here are a couple of fellas in very nice sort of suits, and they eye me up and down as I did them. Anyway, I started talking to this chap, and we crossed the road, American accent. I said, where are you from? So this guy's the head of CPAC for America and the world, So I ended up walking back to the conference I was just sort of leaving, and he got the book. So I've got to get back to Malcolm about CPAC America. And basically, again, say to him, it's great in Australia that we've got people that are hanging on to conservative values, which we should be. But where's the vision? Where are we going? What does our history tell us? And it's not there. And there's not the passion for the country, such and such. So I'm only too pleased. I don't know what I've got. I'm doing at least one talk a week at the moment, but I'm busy trying to write the next book, which is Leaders and Larrikins, Great Australian Stories. And I'm doing what nobody has ever done before, and that is I'm turning the actual events, the actual people, the actual dates into dialogue. So you are going to meet Arthur Phillip. You're going to hear him make decisions. You're going to hear about the secret plan that has never been published behind why they came to Australia. And you're going to meet Hamilton Hume and Lachlan Macquarie and William Wentworth. So this book I know is going to be just a phenomenal read because it comes over like a novel, but it's 100% accurate and it's never been done before. So I'm getting ready for film, which is where all of this wonderful stuff about Australia needs to go. So yeah, I'm busy. I'm only too pleased that I'm busy because I'm responding to people's desire to know more about our country.
And if you're probably asking about Dr. Reynolds' book, if you head to his website, and he's got a number of different websites, but the main one to go to, that's the book right there. You can head to drchristopherreynolds.com. Now, once you're up on his website, which I've got up on the screen right now, you'll see the book, What a Capital Idea, Australia 1770 to 1901. And you click that big blue button there, which says buy the book, and it will take you through to another page where you can purchase the book. There's his smiling face there, giving another talk somewhere, and you'll be able to buy the book from Dr. Reynolds. A lot of people have done that already. Now, your website was down recently. A lot of people even contacted me and were saying, we want to buy the book, but we can't get through. The website's back up and running now, so you can jump on there and get a copy of Dr. Reynolds' book. And of course, when you come to our events, when you're going to be in Cessnock and when you're going to be in the Central Coast, you're also going to be selling your book as well. So it's going to be an opportunity for people to come, not only to meet you, listen to what you have to say, but they'll be able to buy the book as well. I know that to be the case because you've already delivered them to me to my address, so they're ready to go. But mate, let's get into it tonight because we've got a bit to discuss. You're recently on a podcast with two gentlemen, John Martin and also Riley Batatio. It's the Young Conservatives for Christ podcast, and these two gentlemen, young guys, young Australian boys, Christians, conservatives. They've started their own podcast. Obviously, John has been on the podcast before. Everyone would know him as John the Boy. So he had a very interesting discussion with them. And while I was listening to it, I was like, hey, Dr. Reynolds is saying a lot of things he hasn't said on my podcast before. He's uncovering a whole bunch of new information that he hasn't delivered to my audience about. So, knowing that you're going to be speaking at our events coming up in the next few weeks, and I know you've been digging into the documents about Andrew Inglis Clark and uncovering some information there about how our Constitution was formalized or how it was first, come into being and drafted by Inglis Clark. Do you want to go into that a little bit? What have you uncovered from your new research? I mean, you spoke about your new book. Andrew Inglis Clark is going to be, one of the personalities in that book. where do you want to touch on with Andrew Inglis Clark? Because you started really touching on some really interesting stuff, right?
Yeah. It's this wonderful story, and it's just opening up as I'm getting into this story about Inglis Clark, and it took a while to sort of understand and what was going on, because he was in Tasmania, and his father had a foundry right on the docks. He was there when the American whaling ships came in, and he was listening to the captains talk about American politics. And there was the clue, because there's an interview that he has with a ship's captain, and I got the name of the ship, the name of the captain, and the name of the pub that they would have sat in to talk. And he was 19 years old, and it was 1865, and the Civil War had just ended. Now, this ship was one of the few that was still whaling, because all the other ships had sort of stopped because, well, there wasn't any market, there wasn't any trade, everything had slowed down, there was war, etc., only amongst themselves. But this particular ship and this captain kept coming through. So anyway, the captain sends a word to Inglis, and he's only 19, and his brother, Harry, come and meet me in the pub. So I found the pub, and it's the Hope and Anchor. Well, it's something really funny, is that I wrote all this up. I'm writing the story, and then Erica Betts sends me this invitation. We're going to be talking in Hobart. I'm really excited about it, and we're going to be meeting in the Hope and Anchor. And I had to laugh, because this was exactly the same pub that Inglis was sitting in when he was getting all this American stuff, the history, and he was reading the Declaration of Independence by Jefferson, and he was reading this incredible mammoth book on the rules of how you conduct the Parliament that Jefferson wrote, and a few other things. So he's getting right into it. Well, it's at that meeting that he decides, as he's listening to the captain and quoting out of the Federalist Papers and the Declaration of Independence, that he says, I know what I'm going to do with my life. I'm going to become a politician, and to get there, I've got to become a lawyer. Well, he had to go home and sort of tell his dad that he wasn't going to work in the foundry and become a millionaire, that he wanted to do this. But I got to laugh. And then I discovered, this is off the track, but anyway, I find it amusing, so just stay with me, that I live in Rosebank Court in a place called Tallebudgera in Queensland, southern Queensland. Rosebank Court, and the house is called Rosebank House, where I live. This is a beautiful old Queenslander. And I've got this old copy of this library, and it's 9 feet high or something, whatever it is. So I needed a big house in order to get my library in. And it takes 1,000 books, this big structure. I think it's a Pakistani knockoff, but it's real timber, which is why I bought it. It cost me thousands when I had some money in my life. And I couldn't believe it. But Inglis Clark, his house was called Rosebank House, which is where I live. And then I found a picture of his study, and I swear it's the same bookcase. And I think we know what's going on with this business of Clark.
You might be a reincarnation.
Oh, mate, don't I wish? Well, he had lots of trouble. I don't need his trouble. But anyway.
Okay, well, before we go on, because a lot of the people that have heard you on the show before should know who Andrew Inglis Clark is. Yeah. There might be some new listeners. They might be scratching their heads going, why are they talking about this guy? Because he's not taught. He's not spoken about, but he is significant to our history. But you want to explain who he is and why he's so significant.
So I've just said that this young fellow was growing up in Hobart, and he was getting influenced by the American sea captains. The little place was cut off from the mainland and all the shenanigans that was going on. Well, anyway, he gets into politics and becomes the Attorney General for Tasmania. And then they decide that they're going to have conferences to do with becoming a federation. And so Inglis eventually he shows up for the 1891 conference. And while all these guys are sort of busy discussing what they're having for morning tea, because none of them had read the American Constitution. Now, what are we talking about? If by the time you get to 1990, what is it, 110, more than that, 20, 30 years. I've got to get my date, 70, 76, 80. Yeah, you're looking at at least 110 years. So America is functioning as a republic. But these guys, out of the 42 delegates to the conference in Sydney in 1891, only 2, Inglis and the fellow from South Australia, Kingston, were Australians. The West were Brits, deciding what's going on. But Inglis coming back, he had to do this trip. He went off to England. He stopped in America. He's on the boat. He arrives just before this conference. And so he walks in and slaps on the table 96 clauses for a constitution. He had written the Australian Constitution. And while they were looking at that, thinking the bugger's actually written it, he then said, have you thought of a name? And they said a name. He said, well, you've got to have a name if you're going to become a country. What about the Commonwealth of Australia? Well, why would we do that? He said, well, that's what the British do. They have the Commonwealth of Virginia and the Commonwealth of Delaware and the Commonwealth of Philadelphia, whatever it is. And so we need to become the Commonwealth of Australia. And while they were scratching their heads about that, he opened up his satchel, pulled out this old flag, held it up, and he said, well, what about this for a flag? The name, the flag, and the Constitution all come from this one man in Tasmania. And as you said, we don't even know who he is. There is only one father of this nation, and it's Inglis Clark.
Can I just quickly talk about the flag now? That my understanding was that the flag was the Transportation League of Tasmania. So this is the flag here. That's the flag that he would have held up, right? So
yes, that's it. So you can see, as it's written on the thing, because I got hold of the flag. I mean, there's this again, research with me going and finding it. And so I found it as I was reading about this anti-transportation, which was Tasmania's thing. Remember that transportation had stopped in other places, but they were still sending the worst of the worst to Tasmania. So again,
because a lot of young people particularly won't know what transportation means. What was transportation?
We'll change gear and we'll go sideways.
Just quickly.
Quickly. Okay, quickly. When people were picked up for misdemeanor crimes, as we call them today, and they went to court, they weren't sentenced as criminals as such. They came before the court under what was called benefit of clergy, which is another name for misdemeanor crimes. And so they weren't hung or put in the stocks or beheaded or whatever they were doing. They were actually put on the hulks because they were not being sentenced to incarceration. So while they get called convicts, they were not in the true sense of the word convicts, because the legislation relating to people being transported to America or to Australia said that they were being given a second chance at life. And that is that they were being sentenced to labour. And it's actually based on a scripture verse, Ephesians 4:28. Remember, this is a Christian society. And it says, if he is a thief, let him be given work or labour, that he might be transformed from his ways and help others. And that's what the legislation was about. And it was virtually 100 years old and been reformed. And so 85% of the people that were sentenced under transportation to be given labour were there for silly little things like stealing things like apples or socks or spoons or something, rather than the debtor's prison or the criminal prison. And that's why on the hulks, because they were looked after and cared for and cleaned, etc., they were then sent to clean up the streets and clean up the harbours, because that was the sentence, the labour. So when these people came to Australia, they were assigned to the care of Governor Phillip, because they had to be assigned to someone to care for them. But here was the thing. If you were between the ages of 15 and 21, the legislation says, you could volunteer to be transported, to get out of the slums in England. We'd be happy to take you and give you a second chance at life. So of the 4 years that Arthur Phillip was the governor in Australia, and the first 1, 2 and 3 fleets that came out, 85% of those people did not serve 7 years or 14 years of sentence. 85% of them, Arthur Phillip set free because they were being given a second chance at life. And if you wanted to make a go of it, as he said when they started the country on February the 7th, I will reward you. If you want trouble, I'm the guy to give it to you, he said. You know you're going to get yourself into trouble if you're going to take me on. But if you want a second chance at life and you want to make a go of yourself, you can. When Lachlan Macquarie arrived, he got told by the fellow he picked up in South Africa by the name of John Campbell, who was a banker and was into the trade. He said to Lachlan, 90% of the people that you are going out to be the governor of are either convicts, ex-convicts, the children of convicts, or married to convicts. So there isn't anywhere you're going that you're not going to be dealing with people that are social rejects. So you need to fix your attitude. Within 3 months, the pair of them, John Campbell and his wife and Elizabeth Macquarie's wife, attended this dinner. This is all fact. And Elizabeth said, look at this house of this guy Riley. It's bigger than ours, the governor house. They went in and had dinner with 4 men. And I got the names of the 4 people that he sat and had dinner with. And these guys in their 30s with their wives were all millionaires and all ex-convicts. That was the prosperity of just those 20 years if you wanted to make a go of your life. So we've got the wrong idea, totally the wrong idea of why Australia started and the prosperity, the opportunities that were there if you wanted them. Anyway, we're off the topic for Inglis Clark.
Well, I was mainly making the point of the terminology. We just speak of them as convicts now, and we think they're probably murderers and rapists and whatever. The terminology they were using were transportees. So that's significant. But the other significant thing is this anti-transportation league in Tasmania. Were they just saying we don't want any more people coming from Britain?
Yes. Now, understand this. There was a secret plot that went on, campaign for want of any other word, behind the first fleet coming to Australia. We go, oh, rah, here come these 11 boats and ships and, they all landed and they put up the flag and then they built some houses and that's the story. Not a problem. But if we step back to the English Parliament and I do the real research behind what was going on and ask the question, where was the money? They didn't come to Australia just to be nice. It cost 18 million pounds, no, $18 million, whatever that is in pounds, to do the first fleet. And they just decided to do it. It was out of the slush fund, the Prime Minister decided to do it. But 2 weeks after, and this has never been written up, then 4 men met, and I forget the name of the pub, but I got the name of the hotel, the name of the 4 guys, I got the date. And this fellow who was the British ambassador to The Hague, the Centre of Law for Europe, by the name of James Harris. And Harris, he's a baron. And I thought, oh, he's a baron. He's sort of 1 down from the king, I think, 2 down from the king. Who else was in the room? Oh, well, the Prime Minister, William Pitt, was another baron. And Osborne, oh, he was a marquis. What's that? Not a tent. He's higher up than even a baron and dukes and whatever. He's up there. And the other fellow was Thomas Townsend, who was a Viscount because his father was still alive and he was a baron. So Viscount Thomas Townsend is Lord Sydney. So these 4 men meet, and I have the date and I have the pub, and they decide, and Harris says to them, what if our enemy's friend's enemy became our friends? And they said, what are you talking about? I mean, what are you doing, playing chess? He said, we might as well be. Our enemy at this point is the French. And that's upset the British East India Company because they're the largest company in the world. But the French want to go around and sort of get involved in the Asian trade, and they don't like it. And they're building up their navy to go around and shoot cannonballs at the British East India Company. As the spy, Philip Arthur Phillip, who was a spy for the British Secret Service like James Bond, has reported. So we have to do something about that. Anyway, our enemy is the French, and they're getting money from their friends, the Dutch East India Company directors, because they're looking for somewhere to invest all their profits. And the French are quite happy to take their money to build up the Navy and have promised that if you get into trouble, we will be there to protect you. But their enemy potentially is the Germans. So what if we did a relation thing with the Germans? We got them all upset with the Dutch. We were able to cut off the money from the Dutch to the French, and we brought the French down. So when all these guys scratched their heads and said, Harris, what are you talking about and how can you do it? He then explains how he can do it and how he's good friends with the Dutch king, whose wife, Wilhelmina, whose brother has now become the King Frederick of Germany. So she is the sister of the King of Germany, married to the King of Holland, who's in trouble because his country's falling apart because of all these patriot rebels who are aligned with the French. You got all of this? It's incredible. Anyway, Harris sort of works through this. They understand it, and they say, how much do you want? And he said, £70,000, that's $14 million to pull this off. And Prime Minister says, it'll be in your bank by Friday. Now, he then goes ahead and starts this incredible plan and brings down the French within 5 months. By October 1787. When did the first fleet arrive? January 88. 5 months before Phillip arrives, the British don't need the Australian venture anymore. And so the second, and this is the most incredible research I've ever done. The consequence of this is that the new guy replacing Sydney is by the name of Grenville, where you get Grenville in Sydney. And he's a young cousin of the Prime Minister. He's only 29. And he then does a deal. He gets conned into doing this deal with this big shipping company that also does whaling. So they say, we'll give you a discount. We can load it all up. We'll take the money in advance. And the young fella says, oh, my cousin, the Prime Minister, is going to think I'm really wonderful if I can save money on the convicts. But these guys are interested in the whaling, not in the convicts. And so they just throw people in the bottom of these whaling ships. So many of them die. Phillip is mad. He's so angry with these guys. He won't let the ships leave the harbour in Sydney until these captains stand trial in Sydney. He was so angry. But after all of this, so the nature of the transportees changes, where England doesn't care anymore and they're getting rid of all their political rebels. So this is what's happening with Norfolk Island and Tasmania. So they're getting real criminals and don't like it. And so after 1840, when it's all stopped for Sydney and Victoria, whatever, there's no more convicts coming there, they're still dumping people in Tasmania. So this then causes this anti-transportation league where they make up the flag that becomes our Australian flag. Sorry for that long answer, but it's really valuable information.
Yeah, no. So we've gone all the way around. So let's go back to the conferences that they were having to nut out the Australian Constitution and move towards federation. So you've just told us that Andrew Inglis Clark, he's waltzed in, he's written a draft, he's got the flag, he's got the name. What happens then? Because
he writes this article and it says, why I'm a Democrat. So he's a Democrat. He's in love with the Republican system. But what have we got? Well, we've got this thing called responsible government, haven't we? We've got responsible government, Well, what is that? Well, it's a colonial model. It's not really the Westminster system, We're not going to sort of give them that. We've got to maintain control of what they're doing down there. So we'll all call it the holding hands policy. So what happens is that we hold hands with the king, and then the king holds hands with his viceroy sort of person, the governor, And then they sort of, make decisions. And now we've got an executive council advising the governor of the state in New South Wales, etc. And then we've allowed them to actually have a two-party bicameral system. So in New South Wales, we'll have a council and an assembly, the sort of lower house and the upper house sort of thing. So anyway, they can do the legislature, they can have a speaker, and anyway, the governor won't really do anything unless the executive council and who are these guys? Oh, let's not define them, with details, we'll work that out later. So we've got this system with the Constitution that William Wentworth wrote in 54. It gets passed in the Parliament in London in 55. This is the first constitution of the British Empire written by an Australian, very educated man, William Wentworth.
But just to be clear quickly, that wasn't a federal constitution. That was the constitution for New South Wales, right?
Right. But Inglis copies a lot of it. And he's onto the format, and he's tied to, even though he doesn't want to be, he's tied to this incredibly awful model of responsible government. Will you all do what we all say? And even if you do legislation, you go to the governor, comes to Britain, we've still got 3 months to sort of, decide whether we like what you're doing or not. So I didn't mention the Privy Council. So we've got this incredible system. Now, that's not the American system that we see them arguing all the time, but you can see the separation of powers doctrine. There's an executive government, the president or the governor general, who runs the government. There's a legislature that fights over the legislation and the president. And then there's the judiciary that will make sure that everybody's doing the right thing. A separation of power to stop the tyranny of the controlling the citizens. And they need to control themselves, says the Federalist paper. So while this is the principle of Republican government or democracy, where it is the people's government, I'll give you a sentence on this, what we had was a system that was not democratic. Now, here's the thing. So they didn't want democracy. It was a sort of a dirty word as they were doing this. Remember, these guys are British. But here's the question. When I was doing this and having a look at this stuff with English, I've got back into all these books, and here they are, the academics, the historians. And my goodness, I have blasted these guys where they just copy each other's stuff. They're as boring as I don't know what. They're so bad. So I've just had to read 20 of these articles, and sure enough, they all quote each other. They're all locked into the same little stories. I don't want to put you through it, but they miss the point. What's the point? The point is nothing happens in politics that doesn't involve money. Where was the money for the Australian Constitution? When I had a professor, I presented my PhD to this professor, and I was going to, do these wonderful things on the Australian Constitution. He said to me, "But where's the money?" And I got offended. I mean, what do you mean, where's the money? This is the Australian Constitution, a bit above that. And he said to me, "I don't care which country you come from. Nothing happens in politics that doesn't involve money. You go back and search for the money." And I found it. And I found it again. The problem with the money, where was the money in the Australian Constitution? It was hundreds of thousands of pounds that the governments of the states of Australia had borrowed, and privately, massive amounts of millions and billions of dollars. But the banks in England, there was a depression in England. One of the major banks collapsed. The government had to bail them out, and the banks in England got very nervous about their billions of dollars invested in Australia. So they put the thumbscrews on the state governments or the colonies to pay up. Now, Victoria was immensely in debt. And so it had a word, Griffiths, I've got to think with the Victorian guy. He had a word to the New South Wales guy, Deakin, I think, and said, "Listen, mate, we need to sort of have a bit of a think about this, but we've got to cover our debts." Now, Earl Grey, since the 1860s, has said, "Please federate, because I'm sick to death of reading all the letters I get from you colonies and your premiers down there. Will you please federate?" now's the time to do it. We got to do it. And what we're going to do is we're going to have the federal government take over our colonial debts and pool it. So if Victoria is short this month on making its payment, we could take a bit of money from Western Australia or Tasmania or Queensland to make up the difference, to make sure that our payments are regular and keep the banks happy. Well, New South Wales thought that was a great idea, but Inglis Clark didn't. But that's where the money is. And none of the historians that write about the Constitution and why we did what we did, none of them realise it was all about the money. And it was.
Just quickly back, you were saying that when Inglis Clark wrote his draft, he was taking inspiration from Wentworth. I mean, what you said in the past was that he actually had gone to America and got inspiration from the Americans. You want to explain that a bit more?
Yeah, there's a number of things that are on the table for English to look at, for English to look at. The document that Wentworth wrote was in line with what Britain wanted. Otherwise, it would never have gotten passed. But in it, he comes up with a bicameral system and advises to the governor. So that's the structure that's in place. Now, there is no mention in that constitution or the constitution of the colonies of a premier. So how did they get one? Oh, well, why don't we just have one? And they just did. Over a couple of years, they just said it often enough, a bit like Santa Claus. We say it often enough. Well, we've now got a premier, but it's constitutionally illegal. So when it comes to the writing of the Constitution that Inglis wrote, he's aware of the representative system. He hates the Westminster model because it's not democratic. He hates the representative system, the responsible government system, because it's not the. So he divides and writes a constitution for Australia based on the separation of the three powers: the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary, right? But the men that then mess with what he is doing change it around, which is the next question. So he writes for us a constitution that is basically democratic. What are the big principles of the democratic republic? We believe it is by the people. It is for the people. What's the other one? For and by, and what's the other one? For the people, by the people, with the people, whatever.
I thought it was we the people. We the people, for the people, by the people. Yeah,
there's three things in there. But it's basically, this is off the point a bit, but it's there. When Philip arrived, when the British took over and took control of Australia, then everybody across the Western world knew that Australia was terra nullius. What does that mean? That nobody ruled it. Terra land.
We've just got a comment here from Marie, of the people.
What?
Of the people? Are you looking for the third one?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Marie. For, of, by the people, right? Fundamental. Now, let me explain where that comes from. And terra nullius means nobody rules. This is ancient Latin. This is the Romans. They're not talking about nobody lives or camps there. They're talking about, so that then when the King, George, says, this is my country, and he signs the letters patent, as Judge Blackstone, one of the greatest British lawyers that have ever lived, he said, when the King signed that letters patent, Britain owned Australia. Now, Australia becomes terra regis. Regis is king, regent. So it becomes...
I know I'm cutting in again, just to explain for the audience a bit more. So terra nullius means, a lot of people think it means no one's there, but it actually means nobody rules, right?
Yeah. And there wasn't 500 different tribes busy fighting and killing each other and wiping each other out, abusing all the women and the children. Nobody ruled, not one common language. So you couldn't do a treaty, which is usually how you settle the war. It's a silly idea. You couldn't sort of pay people off like you did in India. We'll give you a stipend every year. There was no one to talk to. And there was no sense of value. They didn't value land or life, etc. So all right, what are we going to do? But terra regis meant it's not just the king's land, but where the king went the king's law, went the king's protection, went the king's courts, went the king's army. So the king naturally declares that all the people living in Australia are now my subjects. And I want you, Governor Phillip, to look after and care for my subjects. And that's the way it was. So we still have Crown land, which is terra regis. When it comes to the Constitution of Australia, Inglis Clark is proposing that we move like the Americans to terrace populi. Populi, populace, population, people, the people's land. So in the United States, it is of and by and for the people, we the people. Make and declare this to be our government and our country. We never did that. There is not one democratic phrase left after they butchered what Inglis Clark did. There is not one democratic phrase in our Constitution.
Well, I want to get to that because this is new stuff that you've uncovered. You've touched on a lot of this on the podcast before, about how Inglis Clark went to these conventions. He's given them the draft constitution. What is it, 86 out of the 90 clauses are his. Not many have been changed. But you're saying, how did we get from his original draft to what we eventually got? Now, explain that, because there's some characters involved. And
here's the story, right?
Yep.
So Inglis puts it on the table. They all have to go off the morning tea and don't know what they're going to do afterwards because bloody Inglis has gone and written the blasted thing, hasn't he? But what are we going to do? Because somehow we have to protect the money. We can't have people making decisions, what the democracy sort of thing. Well, we have to do something. Well, we'll sort of just cruise through the next couple of weeks, and then the fellow from Queensland by the name of Griffiths, Samuel Griffiths, he's come down from Brisbane on his boat, the Lycia or something. And he says to a few people, how about we just go and sit up on the Hawkesbury? But he does not invite Inglis Clark, who, it's an Easter weekend. I'll get 91, Easter 1891. So Inglis is in the hotel. But he gets the fellow from South Australia, who's this big, burly-looking farmer, but smart, the only other Australian. And there's another half a dozen guys, I've got their names, that are on this blasted boat.
But I hear reports that he was on the boat.
Who?
Inglis Clark. They say Inglis Clark.
No, he wasn't. And I've gone through and some said, he was sick. He had the flu. Well, if he had the flu, it only lasted for 2 days. Where did he get it from? I mean, Balmain, you don't get the flu that lasts for 2 days. So he wasn't sick before or after. It's an excuse as to why they didn't invite him, because on the Easter Monday or Tuesday, he is fit, back in the conference. Nothing else is said other than these he was sick. He didn't want to come. So they're afterthoughts, but they did not invite him because later on, Inglis says, they messed up my document. Is being polite. Today we would, like Donald Trump, swear about it. So on this boat, I've now got into that, and these boys got drunk. These boys had a party on the beach and then came back to the boat to mess up the Constitution. Oh, I love it. Oh, yeah, you can see why Inglis was upset. Now, the first and main thing they did was the three separation of powers, as I said, the executive, the president, which is in Inglis's document, the executive, the parliament, and the legislature. The first thing they did was they want to be in control. So they moved the section on the parliament to the front. We're in control. Visually, it starts off. The Queen has said we can have a new country, blah, this is all very blessed. And now we're into the parliament. So that becomes the first section of the Constitution. And they moved the Governor General to section 2. They then add a few clauses, which we've talked about before, which is, I think, 63 and 64 and 65, where they cut off the legs of the Governor General and basically say, you won't even get out of bed unless the Executive Council gives you permission, which was not in English. Yeah.
So just to catch everyone up, again, if you've watched Dr. Reynolds on the show before, you will know all this. If you haven't, we'll just quickly touch on it now. So you were talking before about the premiers not being mentioned in the state constitutions. It's the same in the federal constitution. The prime minister is not mentioned. So there's no role of the prime minister in the constitution. So you might ask, well, why do we have a prime minister? We'll leave everyone with that question. The Governor General is mentioned multiple times, and the Governor General should be, as per Section 61 from memory, he should be the head of the executive branch of government, and then he should be able to select his ministers. So the ministers are the heads of each department, whether it be the Department of Health or Defense or Education or whatever it might be. But there's these clauses that you have said before. I think you've uncovered real new research to suggest that you were right, but clauses that were added that weren't in Inglis Clark's original, such as Section 64 and the minister to sit in Parliament line, which says that any minister has to be a member of the Parliament, which means that you can't just pick ministers from the general public, which is what they do in America. Now you have to pick them out of the Parliament, which means there's no true separation of powers between the legislative branch and the executive branch. Am I on the right track?
Yes, you are. So they cut him off and say, all your advisors, and they change the word from the Governor General may listen to the advice of his Executive Council to you'll do what you are told by these Executive Councils, who are all ministers and members of the Parliament. So we, the Parliament, are going to tell the ministers to tell you what to do. Now, the next thing that's that Inglis Clark goes off his nut about is the fact that they then say, this is Griffiths from Queensland, who they think was a marvellous person, and he was a ratbag. Close to treason is what I in terms of how he betrayed us. So he then says, oh, don't worry about the third section on the legislature and the courts. Let the Parliament decide what happens with the courts. So we only have a high court and a federal judicial system because Inglis Clark went to bat and took the bastard on. And while the lawyers up here think, oh, Samuel Griffiths was just marvellous because he was appointed the first High Court judge, he screwed us and almost screwed the whole High Court system, where he wanted to be able to appoint the judges, the ministers, and control the Governor General. And it was Inglis Clark, they're now discovering, that saved the High Court independent system based on the American model. Here's another little thing. The last time we talked, I was in front of the computer and I put in, I don't know why, I put in Griffiths, Deakin, and conspiracy, and Google kicked back and said, yes, Griffiths and Deakin, and Deakin, I think it's Deakin, conspired that they were both going to benefit. And one says to the other, well, let's push this thing through and I'll make sure you become the first Prime Minister. Oh, well, then I'll make sure that you're the first High Court judge. Well, Deakin, I think it's Deakin.
You're talking about Deakin or Edmund Barton?
Who was the first Prime Minister of Australia?
Edmund Barton.
Barton then. So Barton gets the job as Prime Minister. Then he decides it's too much of a headache. So he calls Griffiths and he says, mate, have you got a vacancy over there in the High Court? Oh, yes, my friend. Let me just work that out. So he only serves one term as Prime Minister, I believe, and then went over and sit on the High Court with his friend Griffiths because it was much easier sort of a job and well paid. I mean, you know, even Google kicked back that these guys were conspiring to sort of move the constitution so the parliament had power. Why? Because they were premiers. They were politicians. So there were three aspects of what's going on. Firstly, the money that was really motivating why we federated. The second is that you've got all the wonderful philosophy of republicanism and democracy and even, you know, the Republican government, all that wonderful philosophy that needed to be discussed. And the third aspect was just political, practical practicism, whatever it is, whereby these guys had to maneuver some things around so they stayed in control. So you've got these three aspects that are taking place that the academics, the historians, totally miss. And they just waffle on about what was going on between the men and making the constitution.
I want to ask you this, and this might be playing devil's advocate a little bit, but so Inglis Clark writes the draft, and you're saying the draft has been meddled with since he wrote it. But if they were at a convention, weren't they in their right to take his draft? And I mean, they didn't have to adopt his draft if they didn't want to.
More than that, Griffiths was the head of the committee on drafting the Constitution, and Clark was head of the committee on the judiciary. So when Griffiths decides he's going to step over and tell Clark what to do with the judiciary, Clark had every right to kick back. Yeah. But you're correct. And Clark was on the committee for writing the Constitution. So these other guys did it on the boat behind his back and then pushed it forward. But you're correct. They didn't do anything illegal in writing it, but they were doing something that offended the principles of democracy. So we are not a democratic country today. So we replaced the king or the prince on the throne, the prince in the palace, with the prince in the parliament. And our prime minister has now become a prince or a king. So our king in the parliament, we call the prime minister, tells his cabinet what he wants, his cabinet, who then tells his party what he wants, who then goes to the parliament and they push through what they want, and then goes to the governor general and he signs what they want. So we can have the king in our parliament, the prince, on an aeroplane going to the UN, and he just decides that Australia is going to back the creation of a Palestinian state. Or he can decide that everybody under the age of 16 can't get on the internet. Or he can decide whether we will or we will not have a royal commission into the massacres at Bondi Beach. So it all just comes back to basically the one individual, regardless of their gender or regardless of the party. And you saw with Morrison that because he thought he was in a crisis, he took over secretly half a dozen other ministries. Well, I can't I? So this is the flaw in the system that we have that we call responsible government. It doesn't work anymore. It's a 150-year-old, 70-year-old model, and it's not representing the people. What keeps the Prime Minister in check? Only the media. Only the media. And complaining at him. And now, of course, you know, maybe you listen to 600,000 people signing a petition to force our prince in the parliament to actually listen to us. But the Prime Minister, the cabinet and the party, while they run this country, are constitutionally illegitimate. They are not there. And even a search in AI will tell you, oh, well, yes, they're illegitimate, but we just did it out of convention. So after the 1901 party, where we became a country, and after the after party, then they woke up and thought, well, you know, we've got a speaker. We can have a speaker of the legislature like America, but we better sort of move to the Westminster model again and we'll have a prime minister. And they just made it up. Just made it up. There's no such thing.
But just because the prime minister is not mentioned, does that make it illegitimate? Like, it doesn't make it. Why?
Well, because we wrote a statute. We are not like England that does not have a constitution where they can just make up things and they use rules and conventions, etc. See, under law, what is it? You can use statutory law or precedent. Oh, well, in 1823, there was this case, you know, and then Mr. Brown was suing the government on such and such, and that sets a precedent. But if we are going to have a constitution, and the moment we did, we moved to statutory law. Did we? Well, how did we get? Oh, well, we'll just do it. So they just did it, and we just accepted it because, oh, well, that's convention, like sort of, it's not cricket, but it is constitutionally illegitimate. And I don't know why it has not been challenged. I don't know how you would, because the moment he gets it through the government. But where's the Governor General saying, oh, well, I give you permission to form a government? That's not in the Constitution, and it's not in the New South Wales Constitution, which led to the other states who copied it, for the governor to accept that I'll let you form a government. That is not in anybody's constitution.
Got a few questions coming in. I want to get to some of them later, but this one I'll ask you now. It's from Tony. Did Inglis speak of the benefits of the American political system of economy?
The American political system of economy. I don't remember as such. So you don't find in the Constitution, I mean, you'd have to refresh my memory, if there's anything in the American Constitution that talks about the economy as such, because there's nothing. It's just basically given to our Governor General or the Governor in New South Wales. It mentions department heads and says anyone that works for the public service cannot vote and cannot run for office. And that was in our Constitution, the federal Constitution. I think we've sort of removed it, or we have removed it. So you can vote if you're in the public service, but originally you couldn't. But it's left to those departments and the governor, like the American system with the president, to determine how he is going to run the government. Now, the government is not the economy. Private business is the economy. Now, while a government in any country is the largest spender in that country or economy, it is mostly on welfare systems. And what is it with ours? I mean, was it only 30%? It's got to be more than that of our system. We spend just on welfare and like 2% on defence. But that's up to whoever's in government, i.e. the Prime Minister, to decide how they're spending it. So how they run the economy is up to the government.
Yeah, Tony's added another point. It was Hamilton's concept and formed the basis of the tariff system.
Oh, it was Hamilton's concept and formed the basis. Probably. I mean, Hamilton, which was one of the writers of the Federalist Papers, when they sort of said, well, all right, let's hand out the jobs, Hamilton said, well, I want to be the treasurer, and then made a lot of money out of being the bank, where you get the Reserve Bank that was lending money back to the government, and one became the High Court judge and whatever else they did, Washington went on. So the economy as such, while I don't believe it's mentioned in the Constitution, which is to do with the structure of government, they had to have some sense about running the economy as such. So they would have made, and remember that the big book that later became influential is Adam Smith's book, The Wealth of Nations, which became terribly influential, as does not so much Marx, but certainly Maynard Keynes when the depressions come on. So the federal governments in Australia and America, I'm not sure what happened in England, took over control of taxes, but never sort of gave back the rights of taxes afterwards. So we still now go cap in hand of the federal government for getting back the money that belongs to the states. So I don't believe, see anything about, you do get sections that actually ascribe the powers to the states as to the federal government. You'll have power over the postal system or tariffs or railways or that, but it's control of it. Doesn't actually sort of say what you're going to do with stock markets and how you're going to run the economy.
Let's go back to Inglis Clark, because he was a lawyer. You've said he's a lawyer, so he obviously can articulate an argument. He's not shying away from being able to do that. I can only imagine that if they're meddling and twisting his original document, did he argue back? Did he argue against them? Was he upset? I mean, it was a different time back then. I mean, he wouldn't be able to go on podcasts and radio and things like that and get his message out to the general public and say, hey, look at what they're doing. But did he do any writings or have you found any evidence that he was upset?
Yes. And so he wrote letters. And it seems like, he got up at 6 o'clock in the morning and stopped at 6 at night with all the letters that he wrote. And there's one called Why I Am a Democrat. I'm about to use it, and it's real legal ease. That is, there's no full stops and lots of conjunctions, and it's shocking grammar. I started to read this, and you think, he could be a lawyer today, or the lawyers today haven't gotten over how they used to write. So you've got this sentence that's this long, So I've got to go through all these full stops so I can sort of understand what he's saying. But he wrote his own position. He was definitely with Jefferson. The Jefferson was also a lawyer, but a philosopher. And he was reading widely on a stack of material that none of the Australian Brits who were doing the Constitution, none of them knew anything of the American Constitution or the philosophers of whatever. But he was doing that, but he wrote letters, and that's how he managed to save the third section of the Constitution on the judiciary, that'd be independently appointed by the Governor General. So he pushed and got the other people to see the wisdom in a separate whatever. But he just couldn't get around these guys that were so fixed on what they did, because they had to accept all these smaller clauses on the separation of, and which was the other one. Remember that he's really big on states' rights and states' powers, and was pushing tremendously for that. When he realised what was happening with the money and how Tasmania was going to be losing on the money that they would be giving to the federal government, but not getting back to run their economy, it was the last straw. So with the 95, when they met again in 95 for the next constitutional convention, he had had enough of them. He was beside himself, and he refused to go along to the 1895 Constitutional Convention. He basically, I don't know what you do, put your fingers in the air or something, but he got on a boat with his family and went off to America during that time. And I thought that's the end of it, but it wasn't. He continued to lobby these people, and he became the vice chancellor of the university that he'd helped start, the University of Tasmania. And I've got it in my head. He became, did he really? I'm not sure whether he actually became a member. No, I don't think he did. A member of the High Court. He was nominated. He should have been there, and I don't think they got him past the post. But he was writing. I've got to have a look at an article he wrote just after 1901 when they federated, and it's called. Sorry to do this, but it's a very important section.
That's okay. You can.
Oh well, it's something to do. Are we becoming a nation or just a dominion? But he raises the issue of whether we're still under the control of Britain, or are we really becoming a nation? So I'm looking forward to having a look at that. Yeah. And that's post 1901. He's basically
he really saw us. He really saw this as the opportunity to take Australia away from the control of the British.
Yes, and it's time, I think, that we seriously, as a nation, had another look at that. I really do think that if we turn on the lights and realise that while we push against this system, the structure of our government is not democratic, and we really do need to get away from the people we elect to do legislation running the government. Why? Well, because who's running the government? Not these ministers that get elected. Let's have Jacinta Price, lovely lady, as the Minister of Defence. Why would you do that? Has she ever held a gun? Tank warfare. Maybe she's into submarines. Not 1 ounce of experience in defence. So why would you put? Well, what actually happens? It's very common. They just move the ministers around to promote them, because who is really running our government? Who is really the bureaucrats? The nameless, faceless, exceptionally overpaid, where you can't sue them, bureaucrats. And that's why even in Queensland, we can have Christodoulou gets elected to be the Premier of Queensland. What's he done? Well, nothing. Why? Because he can't. Because the place is run by these bureaucrats. And because I worked in New South Wales government, well, Minister, it's a lovely idea, but we've got this 3-year budget plan and we've already committed all of this money for the next 3 years. So if you're still here after 3 years and you'd like to sort of put up a proposal for what you ever want to do, a Darling Harbour or a new airport, well, we can write that into the next 3 years. So they neutralise a minister within the first 30 minutes that he's in office, because they've already got control of their budgets and their programs. And that's the truth. That is just the truth. So Christodoulou comes in and he's got all these great ideas. And they said, well, Minister, we know that we've given some thought, but we're all committed to putting up this great big useless stadium for this useless thing called the Olympics. And because we've committed this money, and yes, it's overrunning, and if we don't get involved, it's going to overrun some more. So we really do need your 100% attention to be dealing with these people who are builders that, yes, I know we have so many regulations all over, but you have to then deal with this. So he's locked into this big stadium business and a railway system. So all the promises he made, it's just nothing's been done, because it's the bureaucrats that run this country.
And one of the things I've seen in my time in politics is that you would hope for the people with competence and the people that can actually do things themselves rise to the top. But that's not the case. You get the people that piggyback off those people rise to the top. And it seems as though that happened with Andrew Inglis Clark. He put in the work of writing the first draft, but then they've just annoyed him by adding all their own little bits. He's gone off, and I'm not part of this. Do you think that's a big reason as to why he's not credited now? And a lot of people don't know who he is.
It is. And the Law Society people have recently, in the last 5 or whatever it is, picked this up, realising that we only exist because of Clark. And because it's a constitution, that sounds like a legal topic. We ought to have another look. So Clark is getting a rerun of attention and getting the attention, and not just the attention, the kudos that he deserves, the admiration that he deserves for the man who was not just a Republican, which they thought was a dirty word, but he wrote the details. And it's not just the details. But he missed totally what was happening with the money. He just was flawed. But as this purist to think that the practicality of money might influence the Constitution, and it was. So he was most upset by what happened, but he continued. I was really quite surprised that he continued to fight on and keep pushing for what's the other thing? Due process. A due process sounds like it's just me going to court again, or when they're going to court, and getting due process where, I can hear trial by jury. No, it's not. Due process had to do with the ability of the High Court to review the legislation and the activities of the Parliament, which you see, the court challenging Donald Trump, it seems like every 30 minutes, and, way overstepping their mark and what they can do. But this was a major principle, and the rights of the states was another major victory that English fought for, because, again, the central government under Samuel Griffith just wanted to take all their power away, and you do what you're told, like the courts, like the Governor-General. It's this incredible, Cromwell event that was taking place in Australia.
You were telling me that you've uncovered some, you've uncovered indication that Inglis Clark didn't even vote in the end for the Constitution that was put forward.
Yeah. So when he came back in 95, I pick up on all the letters he continued to write, but he was so disgusted with the way they had changed the document that when it came to vote in his state for federation, he abstained. He would not even vote on the document that had been so butchered. He just abstained from voting. He was just, again, disgusted with what Griffiths and the others had done to the opportunity we had to become a democracy. As I said, the constitution we thought we were voting for is not the government that we got.
What are some of the things that he was most upset about? Has he written that? Like, are there certain clauses that they added in or took out that he was most offended by?
Yeah, we just sort of covered this. Firstly, that they wanted to make the appointment and the control of the High Court under the Parliament. So whoever's the Prime Minister, he could control, appoint, dismiss the people on the High Court. So Inglis Clark fought that would remain the power of the Governor-General. Due process, that the High Court had the right to oversee the activities of the legislature, was the next thing. What was the third? State rights was a big one, to maintain the rights of the individual states to run their own economies, which was the question that was asked before. So there's three there. I mean, it was a lost cause for him to go back and try and cut out the clause that said all the executive council, all the department heads, they'd said would be ministers of the Parliament. So that was in. They'd moved his document around, and it was just I haven't picked up where he was arguing with them. He just realised they'd had a drunken party, and had done what they wanted to. But so, I mean, just that state rights issue is a massive thing that the federal government has slowly taken away from them. And when they finally said, let's all do a federal council and we'll all get together with the premiers and sing Kumbaya and we'll all agree on what we're doing across the nation. Totally, constitutionally illegal. There's no separation of powers in having a national council of premiers that all decide that we are all going to do the same things. It's great nationalism. It's great to say, well, you know, we're one country. But what happened to bringing power down to the local level, you know, from the council to the, you know, all we've got is a state government at our level. And here we are stripping it slowly. And I mean, they got no right except they took it for taxation. It's not a matter of the states now making a contribution to the federal government. We say, please, can we have some money back from the tax that we've still got? Yeah. And you know, so slowly but surely defence and that business with Aboriginal land, etc. I've got to think what else, and care all came under state government. So when the Mabo decision looked at how under Queensland law, whether the Torres Strait Island and one island out of the group should get some land because, they've been here a long time. So what happened to Terra Regis? The Mabo Declaration totally refused to acknowledge the law of Terra Regis, that this is Crown land and the King's land and the King's country. Totally ignored it and just said, they've been here a long time. That must count for something. Why? I mean, it's me going up and finding an old Ford car I had in the 1970s and saying, that's my car. Well, no, it isn't. You know, it's been bought and sold and a change of government and ownership. So it's a piece of nonsense, really. What actually happened is that in that court case, at the end of 150 pages, the Federal High Court says, well, this is really none of our business and there's nothing we can do because it's Queensland business. And if you want to take this further, you need to go back to the Queensland government. That's how it ends in the last few sentences of the Mabo. So the next year, Keating then took power away from the states to do with Aboriginal welfare and land. And then with that, he was able to give land and acknowledge land to the Torres Strait Islanders. But it wasn't Queensland and it wasn't the High Court.
But I think you've told me in the past that the federal government cannot take power away from the states unless the states offer it up.
Yeah, that's how I understood it. But there's something in it, I've got to go and find it, as to why the federal government has been able to take taxation. With education, for example, it's just formed a national education body that everybody said, all right. And so we have a national curriculum. But it's against the Constitution, where it says education is a state right. But if you all agree that you're all going to sit in the same car, then so be it. You're in the same train. So it's really the New South Wales education system. So I've talked to David Christofouli, the Premier up in Queensland here, and said we need to take back our education, because on the books it still is a Queensland function. But we just sort of, we'll let the national curriculum, the Australian curriculum, exist, but none of the states have to follow it. But we just agree to, and there's a number of things like that we all just kumbaya and agree to, that we just sort of step over the Constitution. Well, not in America, you don't. You try stepping over a clause in the Constitution and see how far you get there. I mean, states bring cases to their high court in the Supreme Court in America, but we don't have that sort of rush down to Canberra, and we could.
I want to get to a couple of questions. So Gavin asked this a while back when you were talking about there's no democratic phrase in the Constitution, and he's put, what about the preamble, whereas the people, and that is, I know you've spoken about the preamble. You've actually used this to introduce one of your speeches at one of our events, where it says, whereas the people of New South Wales, Victoria, South Australia, Queensland, and Tasmania, humbly relying upon the blessing of Almighty God, have agreed to unite in one indissoluble federal commonwealth under the crown of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland, and under the Constitution hereby established. Do you want to expand upon the preamble a little bit?
Yeah, those first words, whereas the people of these states. So it quickly qualifies the people as the states. So it is the states, and it's true, that formed the federal government. And so the referendums took place in those states. So it's possible for any of the states to say, we've had enough and we are walking away. They were formed, the federal government's formed by the states. And because of that, the federal government is only another colonial act of the British Parliament. So it only had equal rights as another act of the British Parliament, as against the constitutions of the various states, which were also acts of the British Parliament. There was no supremacy of that act of the British Parliament over the others. They all had equal value in the British Parliament. Now we've doctored it and played with it and pushed it around, and we finally get up to 86 and the Australia Act and say, the British Parliament will now have no influence upon the decisions of the Australian Parliament, etc., etc. But when I read the British version of that act, it doesn't say what the Australian version does, and that is that all the states will now comply with what we're doing at the federal government, and they'll now pass state legislation. The British version basically says that we still continue to recognise the acts of those colonial governments. And when we show up and our plane pulls in, you'll roll out the carpet and get down and kiss our feet, as you has always done. But not quite like that, but nevertheless, that the position of the monarch in the states remains as strong as it always has. So when we actually saw Queen Elizabeth die and Prince Charles became King Charles, the declaration that King Charles was now the King of Australia was we saw it with a celebration, as it were. The bands marched and there was a proclamation read by the Governor-General. Well, that same performance happened in each of the states. And as much as the Labor government up here in Queensland hated it, they still had to. The Premier stood there with the Governor, and she had to read out the proclamation and watch the band march up and down, the army band and whatever else, and before a crowd of people, and read the proclamation that Charles was the King of Queensland, as well as Australia. So we've got that problem that the states agreed. Now, Western Australia almost didn't make it. And Queen Victoria said, oh, well, bugger them. I'll sign the thing anyway. If they want to get involved, let them. And she did. Well, I'm not waiting around. And, by the time that the document got back to Australia, Western Australia hadn't. What if Western Australia had not agreed to federate?
Well, they could have been a separate country.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, there's been a few people in Western Australia that keep pushing for it. We need to break away.
Well, I think there's a book that's just come out called Succession, which I think is about that. So, I mean, this is being talked about all the time from that side of the country. There is a movement over there to secede.
Yeah. Well, I think in northern Queensland, they'd love to do it too. They've had enough. Up here, all the fun, what is it? You go north of the Sunshine Coast up here, and it's massive. Queensland is as big as Europe. And they haven't even started the development on this immense piece of land. It's huge. Queensland is as big as Europe.
It's crazy, isn't it?
It is. And you can see, how many countries in Europe? 20 or whatever, 30. I mean, you could slice up Queensland to 30 different little states if you had the population. So, I mean, there's and if it keeps going that you can see the rebellion against the Coles and Woolworths oligarchy we've got between the two-party system. We've had enough. We just have had enough. Is what's going on.
Got a question here from Mark Neugebauer. Hopefully we can get Mark to interview you on the Australians for Better Government podcast as well, because he's starting up that one, and he's always very well researched and insightful. So it's going to be interesting to see you guys have a conversation. But he's put this question. One of the main things I'd like to ask Dr. Reynolds is to comment on the idea that some of the podcasters and Australians with strong voices and platforms are telling other Aussies to not vote in our elections because we have a corporate government ruling outside our original constitution. Do you have any thoughts on this strategy from some of these other groups telling people not to vote?
A corporate government. Well, I've heard this thing before, that somehow there's now there's government departments. And I mean, there's been a lot of privatisation that's gone over the years that, one scratches one's chin or head or something and sort of says, did it really work out well in terms of like the railway could just stop because it doesn't want to run and we want more money or something. But I mean, they used to sort of have strikes, etc. as well. So it's an open question when it comes to that. I see that the private sector in this country has been run to the ground. Small businesses have just had enough of all the legislation. I see that even if you want to go drilling for oil, which we need, there is endless red tape. You want to put up a building, then the government has got everything to do with economy by the throat. And there needs to be a massive exercise. But with this corporate business...
Yeah, Mark's put in the chat, they focus on the Australia Act. So what they're trying to say is that if you go to the New York Stock Exchange, you can trade the Commonwealth of Australia. So that therefore says that Australia is a corporation and a company, and that they don't use the Queen of the Queen of England. Now they've invented this entity called the Queen of Australia. And because they've done that, they've discarded our original constitution, and now they're using a new constitution, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of people out there who have that view, a lot of credible people out there, former senators. I've spoken to a former senator who has told me all about it. Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah. Firstly, most governments across the world are registered on the New York Stock Exchange. And I believe they're in a separate category. They're not actually trading on shares, unless someone can show me wrong. I mean, where's the big thing? If you're investing in Australia, well, that'd be easy. We borrow so much money, it'd be pretty easy to do that, I suppose. But we have to do something about the national debt. So just because they're listed on the stock market doesn't mean that you're buying shares in Australia. And what would that be anyway? which is what the implication is. If you're buying shares in a thing called Australia, what is that? I mean, if that's not, again, the federal government system, because it's not all the big, it's not Arnott's Biscuits or BHP, which are separate corporations in their own right, of course. So once you're a proprietary limited company and you can be listed, once you have shares and you're public big enough and you want to trade, you can be listed on the Hong Kong, the Australian, whatever. But
plus, we're $1 trillion in debt, so who's going to want to trade a country that's a trillion?
And I don't know. I mean, who's silly enough to actually lend us money? And I suppose if the Chinese would be in for it, because they're getting interest. You see, if you go and invest in Australia, it's a pretty sure shot. They'll keep going because we've got so many resources we haven't even tapped yet.
Yeah,
we're sitting on a lake of oil that nobody wants to talk about, and it's good quality. Just to pick on oil, I was talking to my son today. He's in Aspen skiing at the moment as an instructor. But he was telling me he reads widely and comes up with some different sorts of things. Oh, he was telling me about the gas off the west coast of Western Australia, and I had a bit to do with that, involved with BHP years ago. So I thought I was up on it, and what was going on. But he says the gas that doesn't pay any taxes, so all this gas goes off from BHP and Woodside to Japan, and our Australian companies are making money without paying any taxes on it. When the Japanese get it, they then on-sell it to somebody else for profit. And you think, my goodness, this is our resource that we're selling to the Japanese and they're selling on again. And he said with oil, and petrol, we have massive reserves here, but of course it's private companies, and they can get a better deal out of the oil that they dig up in Australia, again, by selling it on to Singapore or Japan. So they don't use it here. They just dig it up and sell it to other countries. And again, you think, what sort of a place is this when we don't even maintain our own backyard, our own home, our own farm, and we're not maintaining that? Suddenly, even though I know that it takes 6 months for oil to get out of the Middle East through to Singapore and through to us, 6 months, oil's in transit to get to us. So you don't run out of petrol in 24 hours or in 5 days, because there's all this that's already left the Middle East before it's being processed. So while I was pondering how on earth we could run out of petrol within hours, then Albanese comes out yesterday and he said, at the moment we have more reserves, or larger reserves in Australia than we've had in 15 years. Wait a minute. Wasn't it last weekend you were saying that we're all out of oil and you got to drop the taxes and we're in an emergency situation and the farmers can't get any of this, and now we don't have any fertilizer and they're all going out of business? And what was that, 72 hours? Now you got more reserves here than we've had in 15 years. So, there's something the matter with the news and the understanding of these resources. So if we're talking about that, that's all private business. It's not corporate Australia. This is, these big companies are registered on everybody's stock market. So I've heard this business about countries being registered on the stock market, but then everybody is. If they're trading, and as you said, why would you want to buy shares in Australia?
Yeah, look, I did do a deep dive on that. I can't remember it all off the top of my head, but it's along those lines. If people want to invest in Australia and they want to do some trade with Australia, then they do need that listed on the stock exchange. So I need to do probably something more in detail. Maybe I can do that episode with Mark Neugebauer, and we can do a deep dive into that. But I want to remind people, if you are on the Central Coast or Cessnock, it's only a few weeks away. Dr. Reynolds is going to be coming down. So on Saturday, the 2nd of May at 2 p.m., this is the Central Coast event, the Lasso Estate Function Room at 2 o'clock. You head to the website, australiansforbetter.com, and you can get your tickets in that big green button there. Just click that button and you can get your tickets and come and hear Dr. Reynolds. And if you are in Cessnock or Newcastle or around that area, the very next day, Sunday, May 3rd at 2 p.m., we're going to be at the East Cessnock Bowling Club. So please head to the website, australiansforbetter.com. Click those links to get your tickets. And Dr. Reynolds, I'm sure you're excited about coming down to and speaking to those audiences. What can they expect from you? Because I know you always tell me you're the best speaker and you're the main event and you have to go on last.
Well, if I pick a topic where I'm going to get angry about it, then you'll get something. But the thing is that I'm only talking. It's a bit like Pauline Hanson, I suppose. She says things that we understand and we know. But there's just something that grates a few people with the way she presents it, I suppose. But, I mean, you can't fault her in the sort of issues. I mean, now she's sort of saying, I told you so, when it comes to immigration, to pick on one of the big topics. But I am upset about what's happened to our Constitution and how we, the people, have been, for want of any other word, totally screwed over. And I do appreciate that it was all to do with money, but it is blasted time we started to look at becoming a country where we, the people, terra populi, that we took this blasted country for the people, regardless of how long you've been here, regardless of who you think your ancestors were, so what, regardless of how much money you do or you don't have, if you want to be in this country and love this country and defend this country and contribute to this country, you're welcome. If you don't, if you think you're some sort of special needs group that needs to be bleed in this country, there's the gate. If you think you can come in from some other country and just get on the welfare or do nothing or wave the flag and bring the arguments from where you've come from, there's the gate. But I'm out to help make a contribution for the people of this country to fall in love again with our phenomenal history and pick up the flag and move forward to where our country could and should be going. So, yes, that's the sort of thing I'm going to be talking about.
Yeah. No, I do encourage everyone to come along and meet Dr. Reynolds and buy his book. If you would like to buy his book, What a Capital Idea, you can head to, again, his website, drchristopherreynolds.com. That's his website there. And if you hit that blue link, buy the book under What a Capital Idea, it will take you to this page and with his smiling face, and you'll be able to buy his book. I've got a copy. A lot of people that have come to our events bought a copy. I think when we went to Adelaide, you sold out, right? So
yeah. May I mention, it's only a couple of months ago that I got a letter back from His Majesty King Charles. So I'm not anti-monarchy, by the way. We just need to fix the system for our people. Anyway, His Majesty wrote, said, "Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Christopher, for sending me, one of my loyal subjects, a copy of your marvellous book. Oh, well done, and I look forward to your next publication, sort of thing." So I was really impressed. And I asked Jeffrey Blaney yesterday if he would come and do the launch for my book in Melbourne, thinking, oh, well, let's see if it goes. And he kicked back immediately. So there was a message there this morning from Jeffrey Blaney saying, I've just had a bit of blood on the brain, which is a bit bad, and it's a shame I can't come. But all the best, and I'm glad to see the book is selling so well. So, I'll keep in contact, but it's great. I have a lot of admiration for Jeffrey Blaney, so it was great for him to send me an email and congratulate me on the sales of the book.
Yeah. Now, we've covered Australian history tonight, and we've discussed it. I've had you on multiple times to talk about it, but you are a political philosopher as well, and as I said in the beginning, you're the only Australian to have worked in the American Congress, and you've worked with presidents and notable people throughout the history there in America. I without doubt, I know you would have a lot of views on Trump and where Trump is taking not just America but the world. And I know this is off topic, but he's gone into Iran since the last time we spoke to you. I think I did talk to you about the war in the Ukraine and what was happening there, but now he's taken America into Iran. He's lost a lot of support from it. A lot of his base that supported him in the beginning he's lost the support of those people. He actually put out this post on Truth Social a few days ago where he attacked the likes of Tucker Carlson, Megyn Kelly, Candace Owens, and Alex Jones, some people that were right behind him through a lot of his presidency and even campaigning to become president. What's your take on it all? I mean, do you think that he's making the right decisions? A lot of people are saying that he's losing his mind or he's compromised or whatever it might be. What's your take just before we wrap up tonight?
Americans don't like getting involved in wars in other places. The First World War, the Second World War, Americans' foreign policy is always a reflection of its domestic reality. So they've got enough going on in their own country, which is why they all originally left Europe and cut themselves off. So that sort of mindset stays with them. They don't want to be involved in other people's wars. Having said that, America is involved with international affairs, but it's always a luxury experience for a president to do anything to do with international affairs. But they've got to, and America is and has returned to being the most powerful country in the world. And it is. It has got a history, of course, of getting involved where Americans would say wars we should not have been involved in. But each of those would need to be looked at again. You know, why get involved in Vietnam? I mean, it was the threat of communism and the spread of coming down, and you'd have to go back and look at that. Afghanistan, North Korea, to pick on these wars that America has been there. Donald came in saying, well, I'm going to put a few fires out. But when it comes to Iran, I mean, it's been going on for, what do they say, 47 years, which takes in a few presidents. And the Obama idea that we're just going to give you money and, you know, if we pay you off, then don't cause any wars. Well, that didn't work out. They just took the money, built up their nuclear supply and gave money to the Palestinians and anyone else because so it's not just America. And I lived in the Middle East for 10 years, so this isn't just me waffling on here. Because you've got, is it Shiite, a different form or sort of Islam in Iran that the other countries don't shine to Iran. And yet in the UAE, it's Iranians that come in with lots of money and have built up a lot of the fundamental business that's there across the Middle East with their money and intelligence and education. So they are right across the Middle East. And a lot of them, it was originally owned, controlled by England. And so British education and a lot of Iranians go off and study in England. And it's something like, I've been told, 1/3 of all the specialists in England are Iranian or Iraqi. So you can see that there's that history there. And when it comes to this religious extreme right-wing group that wants to kill, thousands of their own people because they don't agree politically, you can see there's a problem. But this nuclear bomb business, the Israelis have been following for some time and had reached a point to saying they are about to make nuclear bombs. You know, they're only days away, and we are going to have a third world war. So it's that pressure that's been on whoever has been president that has come to the fore. Now, America has, made decisions, and we can just, and have done a terrific job of keeping it quiet, even to the point that the Congress, most of them didn't know what was going on. Well, surprise was necessary. Terrific amount of bombs that are dropped. I don't understand how there's any threat to the Gulf at this point at all, but there is, and what they're going to do. But you've also got Arab arrogance, they're one of these groups of people across it that know they are right. They're right and right and right. I once talked to a Palestinian fellow who was a chief administrator for the state of the Emirate of the Sharjah, and because he was Palestinian, I said to him, what about this conflict that's been going on between the Israelis and the Palestinians for years? And he said to me, this war has been going on for thousands of years. It will not be stopped this week or this month or this year. It will continue to flow. as if to sort of say it's not even worth your while trying to understand a conflict that's so in their blood that they just want to wipe out Israel, and it's going to go on. So with that, he just sort of dismissed it, that it's just not a topic we're talking about. It's too ingrained. So, I mean, that's what we've basically got. So with the Americas going in there and thinking they're going to do something, it's a mammoth task. The mistake that Iran has made has been bombing the UAE and bombing Qatar. So now Saudi Arabia can't get its oil out. The UAE, Qatar, and I've got to think if there's anybody else in there, and of course Israel, are really now anti-Iran. And so this it strengthens this Camp David Accord, is it called? And people, and this whole business of reshaping the Middle East. So that is what's really happening. I would feel this is as significant as the coming down of the Berlin Wall. We're not seeing it, but it is. It's going to reshape the relationships across the Middle East. And Iran is definitely isolated with what's going on. It's not now holding conferences in the UAE or anywhere else. It's got to go off to Pakistan to find a neutral piece of land. But, I mean, Donald Trump is the person. And yes, he does come over. I wish they'd take his phone away from me with these silly things he says on his Twitter, if it's him that's doing it. But if you watch him in an interview, and there's so many of them, it comes over as incredibly logical in what he's doing and saying. And he has an incredible team that are right with him and supporting him in what he's doing. So with these other people, and I'm not following it, as to why they would want to be criticizing him and putting them out there, he doesn't have time to be doing it. You see, in that job of president, he changes what he has to do every 15 minutes. Every 15 minutes, the President of the United States is meeting someone different or doing this or getting in a car, getting out of a car, and it's in constant motion, incredible amount of energy. So I can only assume that if you catch him, remember that reporter last year or something that caught him is getting on a helicopter and he stops to talk to them and she says something stupid and it was the Israelis that were doing something, I think, and he actually said the F word. I mean, people appreciate it because it was a tense moment. But, I mean, he was just at the point that, if they're doing that, I'm going to be really upset with them. So you do get the humanness with him too. It's not sort of the facade, above all, and let myself make it perfectly clear sort of rubbish that we get out of the side of the mouths of so many politicians.
Yeah, but I guess my question was, has he made a mistake in doing this? Because, yes, there's the global, the world sphere, and then what's playing out there. But there's also the domestic sphere, and the midterms are coming up very, very soon. They're saying that he's completely lost his base. He's way down in the polls. His approval ratings are in the toilet, where he had quite high approval ratings not long ago. A lot of people that did support him in the past are saying that he's lost the plot, and he's changed and he's turned. What's your take on all of that? Do you think it will hurt him domestically?
Yeah, he called it the 32-day war, and the sooner something else moves to the front page of the newspapers, the better. So he's out to calm it down as quickly as he can, but it was necessary. Americans don't appreciate how they were on the edge of a third world war with this country, because they're so, and so do we. Australians didn't, we're just sort of concerned about, can I get to work and look at the price of petrol? I mean, that's the extent of our awareness or concern about the fact that we didn't, we almost didn't have a country, or we were going to be in real war with what? We don't even have bullets to our guns here. So we don't appreciate. So he's in a situation but it's also, there's another, whatever, I don't know what month I do. But, I mean, it's a long time. A week's a long time in politics. So the moment something else happens that takes that attention, that will be the next topic. So the sooner he can get out of this and move to something else, then that's where the media will go. But, yes, he does need to. And you'll find in the midterms there's always a kickback against whoever is in president or power. But they know that they've got to do something about this. I don't know whether it's going too well for the Democrats closing down the government and the airports like they did. So I'm hoping the Democrats get to wear that one because they deserve it with what they're doing. So, yeah, the best we can do is sit and watch, but it changes very rapidly in the American political system.
Yep. Mate, I could talk to you all night as always. We always discuss a whole host of topics, and you uncover a lot of history that we're just not taught. I mean, you won't hear it anywhere else. So thank you for coming on. Again, head to australiansforbetter.com and get your tickets if you're on the Central Coast or in Cessnock for those two events. Central Coast, 2nd of May. It's a Saturday, not too far away. So get your tickets now. And Cessnock is the day later on Sunday. The Sunday, the May 3rd, if you're in Cessnock or Newcastle. Come along. Dr. Reynolds will be there. Katie McCallum will be there. And also Stuart Bonds will be in Cessnock. Martin Stevenson will be on the Central Coast. And I'll be there too if you want to come and say hello to me. You can also head to commandingthenarrative.com and there's links to the ticket page there as well. So check that out if you don't want to go to australiansforbetter.com. And also, as I always say, get Dr. Reynolds' book. Head to his website. You'll find all the links there, drchristopherreynolds.com. Thanks, mate, again for coming on. I've appreciate it, even though we got a bit of a late start. Had to pull you away from the pub. No, you're listening to the blues music, right? That was the...
Oh, yeah, that's what happened. I was all ready for this. And then they started off with some Beatles. And, I get so caught up in John Lennon's amazing construction, and he does these riffs and moves into another song and comes back. And I listened to something last week, and they were and George Martin, who produced so much of his stuff, and Sgt. Pepper's, said the last track in A Day in the Life John had outdone himself. And I listened to how he constructed it, and it was just amazing. Listen to this stuff. So after the Beatles came on all this blues with Johnny Winter and Clapton doing stuff with J.J. Cale. So yes, I did drift away from what the topic was for the evening.
We got here in the end. So it's been a pleasure. Thank you again, Dr. Reynolds. Thank you, everyone who has watched this, people that contributed in the chat. It was always very interesting, your comments and your questions. But for now, we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Good night.